Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. Got Joffrey Noodle Legs here today with another music video for you. Today we're looking at Nick Drake. Um, this is his box set, just containing all of his albums. So we're going to be looking at Nick Drake today. So who is Nick Drake? Nick Drake is an English songwriter, folk singer. He He was born in, I believe, in Burma, in India, but obviously to an English family, and he moved back over to England. Um, and he studied literature, I believe, at Cambridge, and then he got into sort of songwriting. He he produced 3 albums between 1967 to 1974, between that sort of period. Now, Nick Drake was a sort of unknown artist back in the day. No one ever heard of Nick Drake. Now, he unfortunately he suffered with major depression, and in 1974 he was found that he's in his parents' home with overdosed on antidepressants. Now, there is still unknown if that was a suicide or if it was accidental. So nobody actually knows if he meant to take his life or it just died because he took too many tablets. Because obviously if you're on antidepressants and they're making you feel a little bit better, maybe the temptation to take more could, so we don't ever know. Anyway, he didn't really, he was not really well known until his death, unfortunately. Yeah, he was a folk singer and guitarist. He was extremely very technical guitarist. He really liked to study the sort of chords and everything of a guitar, and he was a sort of like a really I don't know. I never knew the guy, but I read about him. He was very into literature stories. Say he studied at Cambridge University, and he produced 3 albums. Now his first album, which I think was released, oh, I can't remember the year. Must have been about 19 sort of 68, 69, and that was Five Leaves Left. This was his first album. Now it's a very sort of folk album. There we go. See the sleeve pictures there. It's a very, very sort of folk album, and he had probably one of his most famous songs on there called "Riverman." It is on this album. Uh, I find his style of writing is very. Um, I love it because it's very in touch with nature. He seems to write a lot about um, rain, the weather, the stars, the planet, nature. He seems to write a lot around those sort of writers, which I really appreciate. Now, as you know, I'm a huge New Model Army fan, and Justin Sullivan is quite similar with his lyrical content. He writes a lot about stars and nature and the earth and things. Well, Nick Drake was pretty much the same, but he'd done it with just most of the stuff is on his own with his acoustic guitar, um, with backing musicians um, on some sort of tracks. Some songs would be just his guitar, other ones you might have the odd sort of flute coming through. Other songs might have a little sort of bit of percussion and drums in the sort of background, and some there's even a tiny little bit of sort of folky jazz feel to it. But this was his first solo album. Oh, his solo album, his first album. He only made 3, sadly, because unfortunately he passed away in 1974 at the age of about 24. I think he was about 24 when he died, sadly. Um, so it was a bit of a wasted talent, really, which is a shame. But that's his first solo album, and then he went on. I think 1970, his follow album, which is personally my favourite, and it's called Brighter Later. This is my favourite album of his. I like the imagery of the cover. It's very, very Neil Young. You know what I mean? Now I don't know if there was any influence with Neil Young or whatever, because they were sort of acoustic artists around the same sort of time. Um, Beautiful album covers. And there's Nick there, bless his heart. Yeah. And so this was his second album. There's some great tracks on this. Hazy Jane, it's fantastic. And my favourite Nick Drake songs on this one, I believe, just checking it is on there. I don't want to say it is and it's not. Um, I'm sure it is Northern Skies. Let me double check for you guys if it's on this one. Because it's a bit hard now. I can actually forget because, yeah, Northern Sky is on there. It's my favourite Nick Drake song. It is on this album. And that's quite a really mellow song with a nice, it's got a full band on it, but it's very sort of really mellow and gentle. And I just love the lyrical content. I love his style. I love his voice. It's a very, very shy. I know it sounds weird, but very shy sort of voice, and it's very gentle, and it's almost like an instrument of its own, you know. And it's very, very, it's quite a soft, quiet sort of voice, but it just adds more to the lyrical content and the actual music. I say some of these songs do have a little bit of a jazzy feel to it. There's a couple in here with like a sort of piano, and then it adds like a bit of a sort of jazz sort of feel to the sort of songs. Um, but this is a really cool album. It's got a couple of like very short sort of instrumentals with like a sort of string running through it, and it's really cool. And these are all remastered, by the way. These are all recorded, but these were recorded in 1969, 1970, 1972. He released his last album, Pink Moon. Now this one was a bit more different than the others in the sense of like it was a bit more of a jazzier feel to it, and in his lyrical content you could sort of hear some sort of issues going on with his depression. I believe, because when I listened to it, I'm thinking, I'm thinking, oh, you poor soul, sort of thing. They're not uh, um, really bad lyrics. It's just like you could feel this sort of loneliness in them almost, in the sort of lyrical content. Um, yeah, Pink Moon, great cover. Um, Here he is, there with his dog. And there's Nick. Yeah, so this was his last album, 1972. After this, he sort of, after this album, he sort of withdrew from any sort of doing any sort of musical things or doing any sort of performances. He probably performed at university or to friends or colleges and stuff, but he withdrew from actually performing. He was signed to Island Records and he released 3 albums. So after this album, he sort of withdrew himself and he returned to his parents' home where he sort of succumbed to his depression and his medications that he was on, sadly. And 1974, at the age of 24, sadly, he passed away due to overdose on antidepressants. And I think it's just because they must have gave him some kind of like feeling of being able to deal with things. And when you're starting to feel low, you probably take more and more and more. A bit like some people get addicted to painkillers, and that can lead to them taking too many. And I think that's exactly what happened to him with his antidepressants. There's no confirmed knowledge if it was deliberate or if it was just accidental. Sad, really, isn't it? They were the 3 albums that he released. Now, 1979, Island Records released an album called Fruit Tree, which was like a compilation of his songs, and then people got into Nick Drake. About 5 years after his death, sadly, they released this compilation of like the best sort of songs from that album, and that sold really well. And then people then started to listen to Nick Drake and get influence from him. A lot of musicians speak of highly of Nick Drake. Trying to think of a few for you. Robert Smith of The Cure is a big fan of Nick Drake, and I believe Prefab Sprout and REM have all sort of shouted how Nick Drake was an influence on them. Over the recent years, they have released a couple of sort of compilations albums of his. It's come out in the sort of 2000s, and this one is called Love of Magic, and it's a really cool compilation. And it does include a couple of songs that were sort of like not on the album, so it was good to get a couple of songs that weren't on the album. So there was a couple of unreleased tracks on here that they've obviously found in the archives. So this was really, really cool. So it's a nice little album, good compilation. Again, it's all remastered, and it does have his sort of like his best well-known works on there, songs like Magic and things like that. But this is like a compilation of stuff that, you know, some of it's stuff that's known, and some of it was sort of like found, and they've remastered it and put it out on an album. So that's quite a cool album. With the box set, when that got released, and the box set's called Tuck Shop, they released this album with it called Family Tree. Now this is it's another compilation of sort of recordings again that weren't on the albums, and they found like demos of, or in his sort of own sort of personal tapes and stuff like that, and they sort of reduced the noise off them and sort of reproduced them into a quality sort of album. And this is a really, really cool little album as well, and it's got some sort of like different versions of some of the other songs that he's actually released. It's got songs in here that never been listened to, some instrumentals and all sort of stuff of him with his guitar. Like I say, he was prolific with his guitar. He was just more interested in finding new sort of techniques and styles of his guitar, and it's a very gentle guitar. He's a very he only played acoustic. It was no rock there. It's all English folk songs, and they were all sort of very gentle and sort of summery listening. You could, you can almost smell the summer air when you listen to Nick Drake's music, and because a lot of his lyrical content was about nature, about rain, about the sun, about stars, and about the earth. It's a very gentle sort of soul, and so what a loss. I mean, and I love Nick Drake, I really do. But if you don't have any Nick Drake albums, these are the three that he actually released officially. So, but maybe to Fruit Tree, the compilation album, I don't own that because I don't tend to buy many compilation albums, unless they're like the Family Tree and that, where it's been stuff that's not been released before, or it contains stuff on here that hasn't been available before. Then I would buy them individually, but they were a part of my box set that I got here. It's got all those 5 albums. This is a nice little box set. This is called it's called Tuck Shop. It says contains all the complete works of Nick Drake. So practically everything that is on tape of him is in this box set. Obviously he released the albums, but obviously the record company would have had a few tracks that weren't released. And also I think his family found some sort of cassettes of him at home, sort of writing and practicing songs, and I think all those recordings are on those discs, the Family Tree discs. And the box set is a nice box. It comes with like a nice built-in sort of place for your albums, and it comes in with 1, 2, 5 posters, and these posters are pretty much all the album covers in their entirety, sort of thing. This is quite a cool one. I quite like this. So there we go. This one's the Made to Love Magic album. This is the poster to promote that. So yeah, so these posters were just like they're just the album covers. This one is for the Pink Moon advert, for the Pink Moon. So obviously when he would have released this, came out February 25th of February 1972. So when you release albums, that they release it with a promotional sort of poster. This is obviously the Family Tree one. which is like from tapes that they found of Nick, that they found cassettes of his of recordings that hadn't been released. So that's what's on that Family Tree album. This was the one to go with the 5 Leaves Left. It's a classic sort of album cover. Really cool. And obviously the last poster in the box set will be my favourite album of his, which is Brighter Later. Really cool. And it is pretty much just the album cover. So it's such a shame, you know, a troubled soul, but a beautiful soul, because you can tell he was a beautiful soul by his lyrical content. You know, you can't feel and write songs about nature and gentleness if your soul's not in that. You know, it's I don't think I've heard an angry Nick Drake song. So, you know, and it's such a shame that we lost Nick at such a young age. But that's his albums, guys. Have any of you heard Nick Drake? If you haven't, I recommend checking him out. If you want something that's a really easy listening on the ear, but it's still very talented and just quite beautiful to listen to, Nick Drake's your man. Great albums, great box set. So that's Nick Drake. He's one of my favourite artists from that sort of era. I don't talk about him a lot because obviously when you've only got 3 albums, there's not a lot to talk about. And I don't know the ins and outs of people's histories. I don't tend to peer into them too much. But, you know, I watched an interesting documentary once about him on BBC 4. And that's where I've got my sort of information up there about his, you know, his troubles with his depression. And it's such a sad loss. Sad loss to the music world, but an amazing artist. If you haven't checked out Nick Drake, please go and see if you like any of his songs. I mean, a couple of songs when you hear them, you think, oh, I know that song. You know, Riverman, you'll probably recognise that when you hear it. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching this little video about Nick Drake. I will be doing some more music videos, so keep your eyes peeled for those. Until next time, look after yourselves, look after one another, and I really hope I'll see you all soon.